On Sunday mornings, we've kind of started making our way through the Old Testament, learning from characters and stories. But this being Mother's Day, I'm going to break away from that and speak on the power of influence. Mother's Day is a wonderful day for those of you who have or had great moms. It's a horrible day for others who had terrible moms, and some of you did. It's a great day for those who have children. It's a tough day for those who can't have children, wish they had children, but don't. It's especially a tough day for those who have lost children. So we want you to know that if you have joy today, we share your joy. If you have grief, we share your grief. We understand both. If you don't have children and wish you did, I've got a plan for you. We have a children's department and a preschool department that you could work in. You could work in every week. It's great. You get children and you don't have to take them home. Now, the people thought that were funny were people who take their children home, okay? They thought, boy, wouldn't that be a great deal? You do. You get to enjoy children. You get to love children. You get to invest in children. You'll have children who will grow up loving and appreciating you, parents of children who will love and appreciate you. You work in there for years, you'll look at the youth department and you've had half those kids in your class. They know your name. They like you. How different is that from not having children, wishing I did, and never being around children? So go see Megan, go see Amanda. Say, you know what? I want to get involved. Some of you, your children are old and gone. I know you need a breather, but you can go back and get involved too. Now, I'd be amiss if I didn't address another issue that seems to be a conundrum for many in our day who are liberal and known as the elite in our country. There are many in our country today, as you hopefully know, who can't define what a woman is. They're just not sure. If we can't define what a woman is, then how can we define what a mother is? So if you're a single man, I've got a plan for you. I think what you need to do is identify as a mother, and not just any mother, but a mother with a quiver full of kids so that you can get all the tax credits offered by the IRS. Now, why not? If a biological male can legally identify as a woman, then why can't I pretend to have children I don't have? What's the difference? And why shouldn't you be silenced or canceled if you don't affirm the size of my imaginary family? And don't I have the right to be outraged if you don't agree that I'm a mother? Welcome to Mother's Day 2023. During COVID, we're told to follow the science, man. But the same people ignore the science when it doesn't suit their agenda. Like when it has to do with gender and the unborn. Here's another point of insanity in our day. Someone has proposed giving every black person in California $200 million each in reparation for something they never experienced, which is slavery. If it passes, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to quit the church. I'm going to move to California, and I'm going to identify as an African American and collect the dough. You might want to come with me. Why not? If I can be any gender I wish to be, why can't I be any race I wish to be? I have a lot more in common with a black man than I do a white woman, scientifically. And it's reported this week that California already has a $32 billion deficit. That's pretty bad. Of course, what does debt mean to a politician or the government? Since our country has a little bit of debt, I remember sometime after I first came to church, going through the bank and the drive-through, and had a little sign in the window that said, "Your money is protected by the full credit of the United States of America." And I remember thinking, which happens to be $3 trillion in debt, which sounded like a lot. Today, we're just shy of 32 trillion. But what does that mean to a politician? All that matters is we get our checks this week, right? I digress. Back to the subject at hand. Most of you have probably heard the expression that the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. These lines are basically the chorus or the refrain of a poem written by William Ross Wallace that was first published in 1865 on the importance of a mother's influence on her children. So what I'm teaching today is true of any person who wants to influence another person. In particular, it's about a mother or a parent in influencing a child. The basic text comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 to 7. We'll use some verses out of that text, out of that passage, but we won't take time to read it. So let's get going. In your outline, the first thing I want you to see is that if we're going to influence others, number one, we need to understand who we should be. We need to understand who we should be. If we want to help them become a certain kind of person, then shouldn't we be that kind of person we want them to become? So who should we be? What should matter most to us? Look at Deuteronomy 6:5. And there they were told, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Above all, first of all, we're to love God first and most. Later on in Matthew 22:37, Jesus told us that this was the greatest commandment. If it's the greatest commandment, it's the most important commandment. It's what matters most. So what matters most is that you love God with all your heart, soul, and might. That means you're to love him above everyone else and above everything else. Well, how are we to live? Look at 1 Peter 1:15 and 16. Like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves. Notice this, in all your behavior. Not just your church-related behavior, all your behavior. As it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. We're to be like he is. God created us to bear his image. Now in Christ, he is remaking that image of himself in us. Look at what we're told in Colossians 1:10. Walk in a manner worthy of the Lord to please him in all respects. Not some of the time, in some of the situations, but in all the time, in all the situations. When I'm being like Jesus and doing what Jesus should do or would do, I am walking worthy of him. This is God's goal in our life. It's to make us like himself. Look at Romans 8:29. Those whom he foreknew, this has nothing, he predestined to become conformed to the image of his son. This has nothing to do with God picking one person, not picking another. God foreknows who will be his. He knows the end from the beginning. When he created you, he knew every single moment of your life. He knew everything you would think before you thought it, everything you would do before you did it, everything you'd say before you said it. And he knew if you would be his or not, if you'd choose him or not. And if you would choose him, he foreknew you. And if he foreknew that you would choose him, then his goal for your life is to conform you to the image of his son. Too often, the thing or things that we're working the hardest at is something other than being like him. We want to get a date, we want to marry, we want to get some job, we want to attain some status. It should be obvious that it creates problems with me and God when my goal for my life is one thing and his goal for my life is another thing. So God's goal for my life and yours is to make me like his son. If you have some other goal, you're never going to have a very good relationship with God, are you? You're going to be in conflict all the time because what matters most to you doesn't matter most to him. You're going in a direction he may not even want you to go in. Whatever they say, most people's real goal is just to be happy. God's goal is not for you to be happy, it's for you to be holy. Here's what I've learned in all these years of watching people's lives. I've learned that if your goal is to be happy, eventually you'll do something unholy to attain or maintain some feeling of happiness. You'll justify having an affair, taking the drink, doing the drug, whatever else it is, because you deserve it, because God wants you to be happy and you think you ought to be happy. On the other hand, if you seek to be holy, I've never known a holy person that wasn't a happy person. A holy person gets God's joy. Happiness is a byproduct of being who you ought to be and doing what you ought to do. It's not something you seek. When you seek it, you never get it. When you seek to be who you ought to be and do what you ought to do, you get it. Make sense? So if we're going to influence others, we need, first of all, to be who we should be. Who we are matters more than what we do. Number two, second thing, if we're going to influence others, we need to be an example to our children of who they should be. We need to be an example to our children of who they should be. We learn best by observing. In Mark chapter 3, verse 14, Jesus chose the 12 and says that he chose them to be with him. Why? Because they would forget things that Jesus said. They would never forget who he was. Your kids will forget things you say. They will not forget who you are. Now look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 to 3. This is the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, that you might do them. Not that you'd know them, but you'd do them. What happens if you do them? Verse 2, so that you and your son and your grandson might fear the Lord your God and keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, all the days of your life, that your days may be prolonged. In other words, it would go well with you. Then verse 13, listen and be careful to do it, that it may be well with you. Don't miss it in verses 1 and 2. They're told to keep God's commandments, to do them, so that their children would fear the Lord and also keep their commandments. So if they'll follow the Lord and do what he says, their life will go better. If their children will do it, their lives will go better. If you want your children to do it, you need to do it first. If you're not living how you're telling them to live, you are influencing their lives, but probably negatively. A lot of kids are not in church because they grew up watching their parents be hypocrites. They tell them to read the Bible. They tell them to love God. They bring them to church, and then they go home and live in sin and do things that wasn't God's will for their lives. And then wonder why their kids grow up one day and say, I'll tell you one thing, this Christianity thing is going in the trash for me. You are either the most positive influence in their lives or the most negative. You got to pick which one you're going to be. We're to live in such a way that if they live like we live, they'll be living like the Lord wants them to live. Paul understood the power of example, and he mentions it 4 times here in Scripture. Look at Ephesians 5:1. Be imitators of God as beloved children. The word imitator is the Greek word from which we get our word mimic. Some of you old timers, how many of you remember I Love Lucy? That goes all the way back to black and white days, okay? Some of you people didn't know TV used to be in black and white, but it did. And one of the Lucy episodes, Harpo Marx was on it. And Lucy dresses up like Harpo and she mirrors him. And they've got this, it's one of the greatest scenes in Hollywood history. And so Harpo was doing all this stuff and Lucy's dressed like him, mimicking everything he does. That's what we're to do. We're to mimic God. 1 Thessalonians 1:6, you become mimics of us and of the Lord. 1 Corinthians 11:1, be imitators of me just as I also am of Christ. 1 Corinthians 4:16, be imitators of me. So Paul wasn't perfect, and we're surely not. But if you're heading in the right direction, and if you're ahead of the people you're trying to influence, your life can teach them volumes. Remember, they won't remember everything you said, but they will never forget who you were. So we need to be the example that we want our children to become. Number 3, we need to instruct our children about who they should be. We need to instruct them. It's not enough just to show them who they should be. We need to tell them who they should be. It's not enough just to walk the walk. We have to talk the talk. Now look at Deuteronomy 6:6 and 7. These words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons and shall talk of them. Notice when. When you sit in your house and when you walk by the way. And when you lie down and when you rise up. If you think about it, children come into this world knowing nothing. You have to teach them everything. They're not like animals who have instinct. You know, the monarch butterfly flies to some mountains in Mexico. And then they lay eggs and give birth, and then they fly back to Canada. And some of them who never make it to Canada, their babies will get to Canada who've never been to Mexico, and the next year they'll fly right back to the same mountain. Instinct. But man isn't made with that kind of instinct. He has to be taught. You have to teach him what goes in your mouth, what doesn't, what do you touch, what do you not touch, et cetera, et cetera. You have to teach them nearly everything they will need to know and ever do. So when do you teach them? Here's the answer. All the time. Every waking moment. When you sit down, when you rise up, when you lie down, when you're walking in the way. The picture in Deuteronomy 6 is not a sit down and listen setting. It's teaching them all the time as life happens. One of the ways we did this, you read the paper, you watch the news, something happens. Some kid gets kicked out of school. So you talk to your kids about it. Teaching moment. Somebody's driving drunk and kills somebody. Teaching moment. Somebody gets embarrassed like Todd Helton was from his alcoholism. Teaching moment. And you're forever looking at Magic Johnson gets AIDS. Teaching moment. And every day of their lives, you're looking for an opportunity to merge the Bible with the real world in their life. You teach them all the time. It's a whole lot of work. If you don't want it, don't have kids, okay? Be like a dog. Go get yourself fixed, okay? Come back to that later. Not the dog, but anyway. In Ephesians 6:4 says, bring them up in the instruction of the Lord. If you're going to teach them how to walk with the Lord, you've got to walk with the Lord. If you're going to teach them to know and love His Word, you've got to know and love His Word. See, too many parents are trying to teach their children not to become themselves, and they're failing. And the big problem is that their kids are becoming them, or will someday. Listen real closely. If you're the parent, it's your primary responsibility to spiritually teach and mentor your children. It's not mine. It's not our staff's. It's not the church. It's yours. You're the one who ought to be teaching them the Bible. You're the one to be teaching them right from wrong. Not Brennan, not Megan. That's your job. And you can't teach what you don't know, and you can't give what you don't have. If you want them to know His Word, you got to know His Word. You want them to obey the Lord, you've got to obey the Lord. It's your job, not mine, not the church's, it's yours. Look what it says of Abraham in Genesis 18:19. So that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. So we're to instruct our children about who they should be. Listen closely. Every time they turn a screen on, they're being taught. Every time. Transformers, cartoon is now being taught gender. Your children should never see it again. You don't let them see anything that you're not watching with them or seeing. You just don't do it. And growing up, our kids could never just go turn TV on and watch it. Never. We had one TV in the house. It's probably one too many. And but they just didn't do that. If they were going to watch something, we'd know what it was. And sometimes we'd watch it with them to find out. You can't raise great kids asleep at the wheel. And for God's sake, don't use a screen to babysit your kids. If you don't want to babysit them and take care of them, don't have them. We wonder why people are shooting people up. Duh. They're lost. They're angry. They're hopeless. They've never had a parent. And people who have had parents are paying for it. And parents of people who've had those kids are paying for it. You've got to instruct your children about who they should be. Number 4, we need to teach our children the principle of respect. of respect. I've got several things about respect. Number one, we need to teach them respect for God. Throughout the Bible, we're told to fear the Lord. Look at Psalm 34:11. Come, children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Now, as Christians, we fear the Lord, but we're not afraid of him. What it's talking about is a respect, an honor, a reverence, obedience, trust. Look at Psalm 40, verse 3. Many will see and fear and trust the Lord. This verse tells us that fearing the Lord, respecting the Lord, means trusting the Lord. If I don't fear him, I don't trust him because I don't respect him. A part of that respect and trust is believing that God is right. He's right about everything. He's right about gender. He's right about when life begins. He's right about everything. Listen to Psalm 111, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, why is this true? Because God's always right. Nobody else is. 1 Corinthians 3:19 tells us there that the wisdom of this world is foolishness before God. Take the wisest man that's ever walked the planet. God would say it was Solomon. Compared to God, he's a fool. He's a fool. The fear of the Lord's a beginning of wisdom. When I fear and respect the Lord, believe he's right about everything, now I can have some real wisdom about life. If I don't, I won't. Proverbs 1:7 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Our eternal, omniscient God always knows. Why is it that really intelligent people come to absurd conclusions about evolution, about the unborn, about gender, and more? I'll tell you why. Because they don't fear the Lord. They don't think he's right. They think they know more than he knows. And so their learning and their wisdom and their knowledge goes in the wrong direction. It's not true. It's flawed, sometimes severely flawed. The guy that was the top of the evolutionary food chain was pressed in a TV interview. We actually showed it here one time about life. Evolution, and we believe the big thing. He believed the Big Bang and all that stuff. Well, where did life come from? And he kept trying to push him back to that issue. And he finally said, well, it was probably brought here from another planet. This is the smartest evolutionist there is. He has no answer for life. The Bible does. Jot down and listen to Isaiah 29:13 and 14. Because this people removed their hearts from me, I will deal marvelously with this people. The wisdom of their wise men will perish, and the discernment of their discerning men will be concealed. That's where we live today in America. The wisdom of our wise men has perished, and the discernment of our discerning men has been concealed. Proverbs 8:11 tells us the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. I disrespect God. I don't think he's right or good when I disobey and embrace evil. Proverbs 14:27 says that the fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may avoid the snares of death. Of course, the wages of sin is death. Can't tell you how many times I know of stories where somebody was drinking or somebody was angry, somebody was not living with the Lord, one murdered his ex-wife. And every time the first thing popped in my mind was the wages of sin is death. Death. We've got to teach our children to respect God. Number two, we've got to teach them to respect human life. Look at Numbers 35:17. The murderer shall surely be put to death. It's talking about what we call first-degree murder. Somebody sets out plots to murder somebody. Life is precious. It's God who creates people. He places them in the womb of their mother. If you deliberately take that life, the Bible says that you deserve to lose yours. You must teach your children to respect human life. We got a case in New York City right now, I guess you surely have seen about, where some guy who has a vast criminal record, mental illness, was losing it on a subway, and a 24-year-old ex-Marine got him in a chokehold. Some other guys helped to hold him down, and in that chokehold, he eventually died, okay? The autopsy says that he was murdered. An article in the News Sentinel yesterday said that he was strangled to death by that guy. No, he wasn't. He was put in a head choke to save the lives of other people. That's not murder. Fortunately, there's already been $1 million given his defense fund. But that's the kind of insanity that goes on. Somebody's liable to kill everybody in the subway. But boy, don't you, if this guy goes to jail and can't get out of that, if somebody's hurting somebody, don't you dare help them in America. You can't do it anymore. You can't defend yourself. You can't defend anybody else. Am I in the right world? Happy Mother's Day. Respect for human life. This is going to make more sense in a moment. Number 3, you must teach them respect for people. Though imperfect and broken by sin, people are created in God's image. God doesn't just see the mess that someone is, He sees who they could become if they were His. That's a part of how He can love everybody. You may think of somebody in your life that just seems like a total loss. Well, they might be, but you know what? If they came to Jesus, they wouldn't be. They'd be an entirely different person. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5. There it tells us, God says to Jeremiah, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew you. Here's what that means. Before you were physical, you were a person. So the moment you were conceived, you were a person. Moms and dads, your child isn't first of all your child. He or she didn't start with a biological act of yours. They started with in the heart of God. He wanted them to be. Here's some verses about respecting people. 1 Timothy 5:1, relate to older men as fathers, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters. It's talking about respecting each other in the church. The next verse in your outline is about condemning another nation because of their disrespect for people. Deuteronomy 28:50 says, a nation of fierce countenance who will have no respect for the old, nor show any favor to the young. So there he's condemning the lack of respect for people. So you got to teach your children to respect people. People who are like them, people who are unlike them, people of every race, people who have more than them, people who have less than them. People who are more educated than them, people who are less educated than them. One of the greatest character traits is somebody who treats everybody respectfully. At Betsy's dad's funeral, a bunch of us spoke, and almost every one of us said that. It didn't matter who he met, he treated you the same. You could have been Warren Buffett, or you could have been a homeless man. Didn't matter to him. My mom was the same way. Didn't matter. What a great character trait. And that's how we're to relate to others. Remember how Jesus did that? They bring a woman caught in the very act of adultery. He turns the tables on the men who brought her. Another woman comes at the well. Remember her? Are you married? No, I'm not married. Well, you told me the truth because you've been married 5 times and now you're shacking up with somebody you're not married to. But you had a conversation with her. And she finally realized that she didn't need the water in that well. She needed the water he was given. And don't you find it hypocritical? Well, let me say this. It seems hardly a week goes by now where somewhere in our country or in the world, someone doesn't kill some group of people. Family members, co-workers, or strangers. One of the reasons this happens is that too many people have no respect for human life and they have no respect for other people. Rather than respecting others, they just resent them. And don't you find it hypocritical that liberals who want to disarm good people say nothing about the violent video games that teach aggression and give kids an adrenaline rush to commit virtual murder? So they get the rush of shooting people dead virtually. And you don't think that translates into real life? Wow. And what about the buffet of violence that Hollywood keeps serving the world? How how hypocritical for liberal actors and actresses to condemn good people owning guns when they make their living in movies that are full of guns and violence. If Hollywood couldn't sell horror, sex, and violence, they'd have to close shop because pretty much it's about all they got anymore. Now, this is a message about mentoring, teaching, and example. It's foolish of a society not to expect misfits to live out what they see day after day after day after day. We shouldn't be shocked there's so many people getting shot and killed unfairly. We ought to be shocked there's not more. They're being raised on a diet of violence without parents, might I add. No respect for themselves, no respect for anybody else. Which brings us to number 4. Our children need to learn to have respect for themselves. People who commit crime and murder are not good people with a high sense of self-worth. Not a one of them. Respecting others begins with respecting the Lord and then yourself. Remember the first commandment, love God with all your heart. Second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't love yourself, if you don't have good feelings about yourself, you can't have good feelings about other people. That's the problem. People who hate themselves hate other people. These mass killers would rather die than live. So why would they not rather kill than let other people live? Children need to be taught that God created them. He loves them. Christ died for them. He has a purpose for their lives. They matter. They can have an abundant life in Him if they'd follow Him. Look at Psalm 139, verse 14. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. We got social media, you young girls, and guys. You look on social media, there's these people on there who, they make their living by selling pictures of themselves, okay? As sexual pictures they can get away with in that platform. They're nothing but social media prostitutes. Are you hearing me? That's all they are. And they don't really look like that. They're about as physically authentic as Dolly Parton. And now I've gone to messing, right? Now I've quit preaching and gone to messing. Cindy Crawford probably was the most famous model of all time. And she said years ago, she said, it takes me 4 hours to look like Cindy Crawford. So guy, if you're looking for a girl who looks like that, you're going to end up real disappointed. And girls, quit comparing yourself to artificial people. Can I tell you something? You can look just like you are and some guy adore you, love you, lay down his life for you, die for you. You don't have to be a fake. You don't have to look like somebody else. It won't matter. When you get out of high school, you'll see all these, well, he was the guy, he was the it guy, she was the it girl. And you'll find out they ain't it anymore. Right? It's been divorced 4 times. He used to be a hunk, he's a chunk now. The hourglass figure, the sands have shifted. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Just like your parents look at you, God looks at you and says, I love that girl. I love that girl. A young or old person who respects himself won't be prone to alcohol, drugs, immorality. They shouldn't tolerate abuse. The person who respects himself and has some self-confidence has a huge advantage in the world. Huge. And parents, you got to help them get that, attain that. Number 5, we've got to teach them respect for the unborn. For the unborn. Look at Exodus 21, 22 to 23. If men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet there's no injury, he shall surely be fined and pay as the judges decide. But if there's any further injury, then you shall appoint as penalty life for life. It goes on to say eye for eye, tooth for tooth. That's where that verse comes from. If this woman delivers her child because she has been hit by two men fighting, and that child dies, the man who hit her is to die. He's committed murder. Why? Because he hasn't just ended a pregnancy, he's killed a person. And if a person is dead when his heart stops, why isn't a person alive when his heart begins in the womb? Follow the science, man. Now, I need to say this. Some of you sitting here, some of you that'll see or hear this have had abortions. And you have deep regret. And the enemy tries to oppress you. God's forgiveness is real. All of us are guilty of murder. We put a man on a cross who didn't deserve to go there. He was the most innocent that have ever lived. And every one of us sinners put him on that cross. We're all murderers in that sense. And I know your heart, if you're trying to follow the Lord now, your heart's broken over past decisions. We got a lot of people with hearts broken over a lot of past decisions. God will forgive you, and if he will, how dare you not forgive yourself? Let it go. Let it go. He has. Are you more righteous than he? Let it go. If you've confessed it, let it go. God has a wonderful plan for your life. It didn't end because of something you once did. Let it go. We got to teach kids respect for the unborn. Number 6, we got to teach them respect for animals. Okay, the PETA crowd's going to cheer me on this one. Proverbs 12:10, a righteous man has regard for the life of his animals. Now, animals aren't people, and they're surely not God, but they were created by him. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not to be carnivores. Heard somebody say the other day, somebody said, well, you shouldn't eat cows. Well, and the person replied and said, well, if God would have made them faster, we wouldn't have. See, we don't eat cheetah burgers. But God made them slow so we could catch them. It's biblical to be a carnivore. You don't have to be one, but it is. In Acts 10, 9-16, God instructs Peter to kill and eat. But the abuse of an animal, of a person, of a thing is condemned in Scripture. So we ought to treat our animals well. It'll be interesting, I don't know if we'll ever know, why 7 horses died at the Kentucky Derby. I'm guessing they were all juiced up to win that race. Got sacrificed on the altar of winning. Here's number 7. You need to teach your children respect for leaders. Respect for leaders. Listen to these verses. 1 Thessalonians 5:12-13. Paul says, we request of you, brethren, that you appreciate those who diligently labor among you and have charge over you in the Lord and give you instruction, and that you esteem them very high in love because of their work. Hebrews 13:17 says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Now, this does not mean that you do anything or everything that a pastor or spiritual leader would tell you to do. The only person that you would do anything they told you to do is God. Everybody else who's over you, parent, pastor, government, anybody else, is under him. And so sometimes you have to do what Peter and the apostles did in Acts 5:29 and say, we must obey God rather than men. We used to live in a world where it was safe to say to your kid, well, you do whatever your uncle says, or your stepdad says, or your coach says, or your teacher says, or your pastor says. You don't dare do that anymore. What you've got to do is teach your children what they are never to do, no matter who asks them. Never. How many kids have been abused in churches, primarily Catholic, but also it's happened in Baptist churches, because parents have said, well, you do whatever the priest or the pastor tells you to do. And we just send them like lambs to the slaughter. Learning to respect themselves, others, and leaders will serve them well. If they don't learn this skill, they become their own worst enemy. I have an old friend who's lost several jobs, some of them really good jobs, because he kept disrespecting his bosses. Well, he would give her a piece of his mind. He's my age. He had way more opportunity than I had, grew up way better situation than I did. He doesn't even own a car. He completely lives off the government. He's flat broke. He doesn't own a phone. Those young people going, oh, he doesn't own a phone. How could he live? He never learned to respect leaders. Listen, if you're at a job and a little voice in your head says, tell the boss off, you better have a plan B. You better have a plan B. Let me say this here. If a child isn't taught to respect his parents, he's unlikely to respect anybody else. So that's something you got to go the mat on that one. You got to make sure you teach them to respect you. The real problem in America is not crime or guns, it's parenting. More specifically, it's the lack of parenting. 75% of black kids are born without a dad in the house. And we're surprised that our prison's full of them. Over 30-something% of white kids are now born without a dad in the house. Boys especially need a dad. They need an alpha male who can teach them how to be a man. A woman can't teach a boy how to be a man. She's got to have a man in his life. Last of all, number 8, we must teach them to have respect for things. For things. In 1 Corinthians 4:2, it's required of stewards that one be found untrustworthy. I mean trustworthy, not untrustworthy. Hello. When a rich man dies, people often ask, well, I wonder how much he left. I got the answer. All of it. All of it. We enter this world with nothing, says in Ecclesiastes, and we leave it with nothing. We're not really owners. We're just stewards. We're managers. Right now in life, I have these things in my life that I manage. They are not mine. One day I'll die, and I'll leave this world with what I came into this world with, nothing. Nothing. It's like monopoly money. We're just going to, one day it all goes back in the box. We're handling his money and his things. If that's true, we ought to be good stewards of his money and his things. A lot of children are out of control and reckless. You give them a toy, they destroy it. They destroy things around your house. If a child disrespects what you give to him or her, don't replace it. You give them a toy and they mistreat it and destroy it. Well, tough luck. If they'd like another one, if they can somehow work to buy the next one, that'd be okay. But don't go replace it. Don't teach your children that they can do whatever they want to do and mom and daddy will fix it. Don't teach them they can do whatever they want to do and it won't cost them anything. Well, probably the most important lesson that you need to teach your kids is that choices have consequences. And so you teach them a lesson. Well, I wish you hadn't done that. Don't have that now. Well, I want one. Well, let's see if we can work and we'll buy you one with your own money. I've been in homes where walls and doors had holes in them that the kids had put in there. And I thought my kid have a hole in their rear end if they had done it in our house. And of course, I'm talking about kids who are responsible enough to manage it, not toddlers. For years on our park down below, some of you don't know we have one. Below here, we built this great park for the community. We had this nice full court basketball court. Man, I would have given anything to have a place like that to play. I played on dirt in my backyard. This beautiful full court, fully striped basketball court. And people came in and just disrespected the place. They just trashed it every time they came. We took goals down twice, finally permanently. One time I went down to play tennis and I picked up 20 water bottles within 3 steps of the garbage can. These are people who have no respect for people or things. And so now we don't have a basketball court for some good people who would like to use it probably. We had a sand volleyball pit. It just became some place for parents to sit around and watch their kids hang on the net and see if they could break it. It's gone. We used to let people use our tennis courts. Now they're locked up. We had people roller skating. I don't know what all been on that place. I mean, skateboarding, all kinds of stuff going on in there. No respect for things. And so now none of those things are there. We had to take them off. Why? Because they didn't learn to respect anything. You teach your children to take care of their stuff. You teach them to take better care of other people's stuff. When I grew up, if I had anything, I had to pay for it. You let them pay for it, they'll take better care of it than you just doling it out to them. Funny story, as an adult, my neighbor, I was doing some work in the yard and I needed a heavy rake. I didn't have one, so I went to my neighbor's house and got this old heavy rake he had. It had a cracked handle and just out in his old barn. And so I got it and I raked and used it. And I thought, I'm going to go to Home Depot and buy him a handle. So I took it back and put it back in his barn, and it had this nice fiberglass handle on it that I'd put on it. Because, he'd let me borrow it, so I need to be appreciative. And so about 2 days later, he comes over, he says, I want you to have this. He said, I've loaned stuff to people all my life who brought it back in worse condition, but I've never had anybody bring it back in better condition than they got it. And so I have that rake today in my garage. Teach them to take care of stuff. It'll serve them well. Here's the last thing. Number 5, we're to correct our children when they fail to be who they should be. We're to correct our children when they fail to be who they should be. Look at these verses. Ephesians 6:4 should say, bring them up in the discipline of the Lord. I used this verse earlier. I copied it over here and we didn't change that word. It says, bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So it should say discipline in this case. Hebrews 12:6-8 says, and 10, to whom the Lord loves, those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines. If you're without discipline, then you're illegitimate children and not sons. He disciplines us for our good that we may share his holiness. Now, these verses obviously relate to your children, not somebody else's, okay? Don't try to discipline somebody else's children down at the Walmart. It won't go well. So they must learn that behaving has rewards and misbehaving has penalties. They've got to learn that God blesses good behavior. He disciplines and punishes bad behavior. It eventually winds you up in hell. I'd call that punishment. And that we reap what we sow. Notice that correcting your children here is proof that you love them. I've heard people say, I just love my child too much. I could never correct them. No, the problem is you love wanting them to love you. You don't care about how they turn out. You only care about what they feel about you. You're not a good parent. See, here's the deal with parenting. You don't want your kids to grow up thinking you're great. I mean, it's nice if they do. But your goal is not for your kids to think you're the greatest. Your goal is for everybody else to think your kids are the greatest. They're so well behaved. They're so respectful. They're so whatever. That's when you've won. If you want to think you're the greatest, just let them do whatever they want to do and throw all the money at them that you can throw. They'll think you're great. Everybody else will hate them, but they'll think you're great. One day you'll pay for it on the other end. It's unloving to do nothing while your child grows up to be a person who becomes his own worst enemy and who nobody likes. If you don't correct them early, it'll be hard to change them later. If you don't correct them, somebody else will. The kids at school won't want to play with them, won't want to have them in the group. The teacher will want them in the class. The coach will cut them from the team. The boss will fire them. Society won't have anything to do with them. The prison system will probably be where they'll end up. Every child is born a sinner. You don't have to teach a child to do the wrong thing. You don't have to teach your child. How many of you had to teach your child how to tell a lie? How many sat down one morning and said, now son, you're going to need to lie in your life. Let me tell you how to do it. How many of you had to teach them how to deceive? Not one of you, did they? Came pretty naturally, didn't it? That's because they're sinners, just like me, just like you. So you got to teach them to do the right thing. They'll naturally do the wrong thing. As a parent, you're the primary influencer in their life, good and bad. The problem with a lot of kids is that they're becoming who their parents are. And that's dangerous. It's not just bad or sad anymore, it's now become dangerous. Last thing. I heard this one time and I thought, gosh, that is good. You should never have children for your reasons. You have children for their reasons. You don't have children because you want one. If you want a little child to love, get yourself a puppy. Get yourself a puppy. You don't have children because you need one. You have children because you have to give what they need. Physically, financially, maritally, spiritually, psychologically. We don't need more. How many of you noticed that the wrong people are having the most babies? Has anybody figured that out? The wrong people are having the most babies. And we have babies because we want them. That's not a good reason to have them. You have a child because you have everything to give that child that child will need. Their reasons, not yours. Parenting, mothering isn't about your needs. It's about the child's needs. Let's pray.